Caleb Brooks was 42 years old when the city learned his name for all the wrong reasons, but long before any newspaper printed it beside the word fraud, he was just a black single father waking before sunrise in a two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the west side of Atlanta. His mornings began at 4:45, not with an alarm, but with the old radiator knocking in the wall like a tired fist. He would sit up quietly, careful not to wake Isaiah, then lace his work boots under the dim yellow bulb by the kitchen table. Coffee first. Black, no sugar. Then sandwiches wrapped in foil, one for himself, one for his son, with the crust cut off because Isaiah said the edges tasted like cardboard. Caleb worked maintenance at St. Agnes Medical Center, fixing lights, unclogging drains, replacing ceiling panels, doing the kind of work people only noticed when it went wrong. His hands were broad, dark, and always carrying some trace of labor, grease near the knuckles, a crescent of dust under one nail, a small burned scar across the back of his thumb from a boiler pipe that burst 3 winters ago. To most people in the hospital, he was a uniform moving through the hallway. A man with a toolbox. A name stitched in fading blue thread. But to Isaiah, he was the one who knew how to fold a blanket into a tent, how to make canned soup taste like Sunday dinner, and how to smile even when the bills lay open on the counter like bad news waiting for permission to speak. That Friday evening, rain came down hard enough to blur the streetlights into trembling gold. Caleb had just finished replacing a faulty breaker in the east wing when his phone buzzed. Isaiah's school had called twice, then left a message saying his son's field trip payment was overdue. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second, not out of anger, just calculation. Rent. Groceries. Medicine for Isaiah's cough. The field trip could wait. Childhood should not have to wait, he thought, but sometimes fathers had to choose which disappointment would hurt less. He wiped his hands on an old rag, packed his toolbox, and stepped toward the service exit. That was when he heard the sound. Not a scream. Not exactly. More like a child trying not to fall apart. It came from the emergency corridor near the private intake doors, where wealthy donors and important names were brought in away from the main waiting room. Caleb paused. Security guards were rushing past. Nurses moved with clipped urgency. A black SUV sat outside under the awning, rainwater streaming down its tinted windows. Near the far wall, 2 small children sat on the floor in wet pajamas, a boy and a girl, both pale, both shaking, both staring at the adults as if the whole world had become too loud to trust. The girl clutched a torn piece of cashmere coat against her chest. The boy had dried blood on his sleeve, but his eyes were open, watchful, protective. Caleb did not know their names yet. He did not know that their mother was Evelyn Ashford, billionaire heiress, or that the polished woman in the cream coat standing nearby was Madeline Pierce, the Ashford family attorney, elegant, striking, and cold enough to make grief look like a business meeting. He only saw children. So he set down his toolbox, lowered himself slowly to the floor several feet away, and placed Isaiah's untouched lunchbox between them. "You don't have to talk," he said softly. "Just breathe with me." Madeline turned sharply at the sound of his voice. Her eyes moved over his uniform, his worn boots, the grease on his hands. "Excuse me," she said, controlled but cutting. "Who authorized you to be near them?" Caleb looked up, calm, not offended, not submissive. "No one, ma'am." A security guard reached for his radio. The boy flinched. Caleb noticed. So did Madeline. Something felt wrong. Caleb slid the lunchbox a little closer to the children and moved his hands back where everyone could see them. "I'll step away," he said. "But don't crowd them." The little girl suddenly reached out and caught the edge of his oil-stained sleeve. The hallway went silent. Before we go deeper into what he discovered that night, tell us where you're watching from and do not forget to subscribe, because what happened next changed the way everyone looked at him. Madeline stared at the child's tiny fingers wrapped around Caleb's sleeve, then at the old toolbox beside him. Its latch had fallen open in the rush, revealing a folded hospital visitor badge from months earlier with one name written across it in blue ink, Noah Ashford. Madeline's breath caught. The child saw what everyone else missed. And Caleb had no idea that one small piece of paper was about to pull him into a family that had been breaking long before the accident. Madeline Pierce had spent 10 years learning how to keep her face unreadable, but the name on that old visitor badge made something move behind her eyes. Noah Ashford. Not printed by a machine. Written by hand. Blue ink, slightly faded, folded into the side pocket of a maintenance toolbox that should have held nothing but wire cutters, spare screws, and electrical tape. She stepped closer, the heels of her beige pumps clicking against the wet hospital tile. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Her voice stayed calm, but Caleb heard the tightness beneath it. Men like him learned early to hear what people were trying not to say. He looked down at the badge, then back at the boy on the floor. The child had not taken his eyes off it. "A little boy left it in the chapel a few months back," Caleb said. "I held on to it in case he came back looking." Madeline's expression did not soften. If anything, it sharpened. "You expect me to believe you kept a billionaire child's badge in your toolbox by accident?" The security guard shifted his weight. A nurse stopped pretending not to listen. Caleb felt the old, familiar pressure settle over the hallway. The kind that did not need a raised voice to make a man feel accused. He glanced at the children before answering. The girl still held his sleeve. The boy's small jaw trembled with the effort of staying brave. Caleb could have defended himself harder. He could have asked why she assumed the worst. He could have pointed out that the badge had been there long before the rain, before the sirens, before anyone in that hallway knew his name. Instead, he kept his voice low. "Ma'am, I am not asking you to believe anything right now. I am asking you not to scare them more than they already are." That sentence landed differently than Madeline expected. Not dramatic. Not pleading. Just steady. She looked at Caleb again, really looked this time. The faded hospital shirt. The old work pants damp at the knees from sitting on the floor. The lunchbox with cartoon space rockets scratched across the lid. The hands held open, careful, visible, as if his own body had learned how to make itself less threatening in rooms that judged too quickly. Still, suspicion had been her profession long before kindness had become a risk she could afford. "Step away from the children," she said. Caleb nodded once. He moved slowly, but the moment his sleeve slipped from Lily's fingers, the little girl made a sound so small it nearly vanished under the rain against the glass. Noah reached for her, but she shook her head and whispered, "No. Him." Everyone froze. Madeline's breath caught before she could stop it. The doctors had told her Lily had not spoken since she arrived. Not once. Caleb stopped moving. He did not smile. He did not claim victory over the room. He only looked at Lily the way a father looks at a frightened child in the dark, with patience instead of pride. "I am still right here," he said. Lily stared at him, her eyes shining and lost. Noah looked from Caleb to Madeline, then to the badge inside the open toolbox. His mouth parted like he wanted to say something, but fear held him by the throat. Madeline saw it. That was the part she could not file away neatly. Children from the Ashford family were trained from birth to shake hands with senators, smile for cameras, and behave beside marble fireplaces while adults discussed money above their heads. But this boy, this heir to a name worth billions, looked at a hospital maintenance worker like he had found the only solid thing left in the world. Grant Ashford arrived 5 minutes later, wrapped in a dark overcoat, his silver hair wet from the rain, his anger polished enough to look like authority. He did not kneel beside Noah or Lily. He did not ask whether they had eaten or if the lights hurt their eyes. He looked first at Madeline, then at Caleb, then at the small dark handprint on Lily's sleeve from where Caleb had steadied her near the ambulance doors. "Why is he still here?" Grant asked. Caleb lowered his eyes for 1 second, not from shame, but to make sure Lily was not watching the man's face. Madeline noticed that too. It bothered her. Grant pointed toward the service doors. "Get him out." The guard moved, but Noah suddenly stood, thin and shaking, and stepped in front of Caleb's toolbox. His voice came out cracked, barely more than air. "He knows my name." Madeline turned slowly toward the boy. Grant went still. Caleb did not understand why those 4 words changed the temperature of the hallway, but Madeline did. Because Noah had not said that with surprise. He had said it like he was remembering something. And in the open toolbox, beneath the folded visitor badge, Madeline saw the corner of a child's drawing tucked under a roll of black tape, marked with the same blue ink and the same name. The drawing should not have been there. Madeline knew that before she even reached for it. Something about the folded corner, the careful way it had been tucked beneath the black tape, made the hallway feel smaller, as if the hospital lights had lowered around them. Grant saw her looking and stepped forward too quickly. "Do not touch that," he said. His voice was smooth, but the command inside it was hard enough to make one of the nurses look down. Caleb noticed the nurse first. He noticed everything when children were near. Fear traveled through rooms like cold air under a door. He bent slowly and closed the toolbox with one hand, not to hide anything, but to keep the adults from turning a frightened boy's memory into a courtroom before midnight. "It is just paper," Caleb said. "Then you should have no problem handing it over," Grant replied. Caleb looked at him then. Not challenging. Not soft either. Rainwater tapped against the glass doors behind them. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. Lily had gone quiet again, her little fingers curled into the torn cashmere coat like it was the last piece of her mother she could keep. Noah stood rigid beside the toolbox, small shoulders squared in a way no 5-year-old should have to learn. Caleb had seen that posture before in Isaiah after his mother passed, the terrible little bravery children put on when adults are falling apart. "Sir," Caleb said, "that boy is standing between you and a toolbox because he thinks whatever is inside matters. Maybe ask him why before you take it." Grant's face tightened. Madeline turned slightly, watching Caleb from the corner of her eye. He did not sound like a man defending himself. He sounded like a father protecting a child's right to be heard. That unsettled her more than any excuse would have. Grant crouched in front of Noah, but even that gesture felt performed, like a photograph waiting to happen. "Noah," he said carefully, "did this man give you something? Did he tell you to say that you knew him?" Noah stared at him, silent. His lower lip trembled once, then stopped. Caleb looked away to give the boy room. It was such a small act, almost invisible, but Madeline caught it. Most adults stared at grieving children as if attention could pull answers out of them. Caleb gave silence like a blanket. For one brief second, Noah looked relieved. Madeline felt that relief in the pit of her stomach. She had built her career on reading leverage, signatures, ownership, liability. She had not built it on watching a little boy decide which adult was safe. "Mr. Brooks," she said, quieter now, "you said you found the badge in the chapel months ago." Caleb nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "And the drawing?" He paused. Not because he was hiding something. Because memory came back with the smell of floor wax and rainy pavement. "Same day," he said. "There was a school group visiting the children's wing. One boy got separated near the vending machines. He did not cry. Just stood there holding that drawing like if he moved, the whole building would swallow him." Noah blinked. Madeline saw it. The child remembered. Caleb continued, voice low enough that the whole hallway leaned in without meaning to. "I asked if he needed help. He would not tell me his last name. Just Noah. So I walked him to the chapel because it was quiet, and I called the front desk. He drew while we waited." Grant cut in. "That proves nothing." Caleb nodded once, as if agreeing that facts should not be stretched beyond their shape. "No, sir. It does not." Madeline studied him. A man trying to manipulate a billionaire family would have grabbed that moment with both hands. Caleb let it pass. He did not make himself bigger. He did not make the story shine. He simply stood there in damp work boots, old lunchbox beside him, letting truth be plain. Then Lily lifted her face from the coat. Her eyes went to Caleb, then to Madeline, then to the closed toolbox. Her voice came out thin, but clear enough to stop every breath in the corridor. Mommy said find the man from the chapel. Grant went pale so fast Madeline almost missed it. Caleb did miss it, because he was looking at Lily, and all he could hear was the weight no child should have been asked to carry. Madeline slowly turned toward Grant. For the first time that night, her polished confidence cracked, not loudly, not completely, but enough. Because Evelyn Ashford had been careful about everything in life. If she had mentioned Caleb Brooks before the accident, it was not random. And if Grant knew that, then his anger had never been about a maintenance worker getting too close. It had been about something he needed kept away. For 3 seconds, no one moved. The words from Lily hung in the emergency corridor like a fragile thing no adult wanted to be responsible for breaking. Mommy said find the man from the chapel. Caleb felt the sentence settle somewhere deep in his chest, not as pride, not even as fear, but as a question he did not know how to carry. He had met a lost boy once. He had waited with him in a chapel until a staff member came. He had given him a pencil because the boy's hands would not stop shaking. That was all. At least, that was all Caleb had allowed himself to remember. Grant Ashford recovered first. Men like him were good at recovering in public. His face tightened, then smoothed. She is exhausted, he said, turning to Madeline as if Lily had become evidence to manage instead of a child to comfort. She just lost her mother. Children repeat things. They confuse faces. Caleb did not answer. He crouched near Lily again, leaving enough space that everyone could see he was not forcing trust. You did good, he said softly. You do not have to say anything else. Lily's chin trembled. Noah stepped closer to her, one small hand touching her shoulder. Madeline watched the 2 children lean toward Caleb without being told, without calculation, and for the first time that night she wondered what kind of house made children afraid of the people who shared their name. She hated that thought. It was dangerous. It opened doors her job had trained her to keep locked. Grant signaled to the security guard. Take Mr. Brooks out of the private corridor. Now. The guard hesitated. He had removed loud visitors, angry relatives, men who came in swinging words like bottles. Caleb Brooks was none of those things. He stood slowly, picked up his toolbox, and glanced toward the children. I will be right outside if the nurses need anything fixed, he said. It was such an ordinary sentence. Almost too ordinary for the weight in the room. But Noah heard it as a promise. Lily did too. Caleb turned toward the service doors, rainlight flashing over the floor ahead of him. He could feel Madeline's eyes on his back. Not soft yet. Not trusting. Just uncertain, and uncertainty in a woman like Madeline Pierce was almost an event. He had nearly reached the double doors when Lily began to cry without making much sound. Her small body folded inward. Noah tried to hold her, but his own face twisted with panic. A doctor moved in with practiced kindness. Lily pulled away. A nurse offered juice. She shook her head. Grant stepped closer. Both children recoiled. The entire hallway saw it. Madeline saw it most clearly. Something changed in her face. Not emotion exactly, but recognition. There are moments when power finds out it has no use. This was one of them. Wait, she said. Caleb stopped. Grant turned on her. Madeline. She did not look at him. The children are not stable. They are Ashford's. They will be cared for by Ashford's staff. They are children, she said, and the sentence came out colder than she intended, because if she let it come out warm, it might reveal too much. Caleb remained by the service doors, one hand around the handle of his toolbox, his old lunchbox tucked under his arm. Isaiah's sandwich was still inside, untouched. He thought of his son waiting at Mrs. Turner's apartment upstairs from the laundromat, pretending not to worry when Caleb worked late. He thought of the overdue field trip money. He thought of how quickly a simple act could become a problem when a man like him crossed the wrong invisible line. Madeline walked toward him, close enough now for him to notice the details he had missed before, the pearl earrings, the flawless coat, the faint scent of expensive perfume fighting with hospital disinfectant, and beneath it all, a tiredness she wore like a secret. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I need you to come back for a few minutes." Caleb looked past her at Grant. "I do not want any trouble." "Neither do I." He almost smiled at that, but did not. People who did not want trouble rarely stood in marble corridors with billionaires at midnight. Madeline lowered her voice. "If you can help them calm down, do it from the chair by the wall. No questions. No touching unless they come to you first. Is that clear?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He returned to the corridor and sat in the hard plastic chair near the vending machine, the kind of chair nobody important ever noticed. He placed the lunchbox on his knees and opened it. Inside was a peanut butter sandwich, a small apple, and a folded napkin with a rocket ship drawn in blue crayon by Isaiah. Lily stared at the drawing. Noah stared too. Caleb followed their eyes, then quietly turned the napkin so they could see it better. "My son likes rockets," he said. Lily wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "Noah likes rockets," she whispered. Madeline looked at Noah. The boy's eyes had changed. Not healed. Not safe. But present. Caleb tore the sandwich into 3 careful pieces and set them on the napkin, not offering, not pushing, just making the world smaller and easier to understand. After a long moment, Noah took one. Then Lily. Grant looked away as if the sight offended him. Madeline did not look away. She kept watching Caleb's hands, the same hands she had judged minutes earlier, now breaking bread with 2 children who would not take food from anyone else. And somewhere above them, in a quiet security room, a camera recorded every second. The recording was supposed to make things simple. Madeline Pierce believed in recordings, signatures, timestamps, and sworn statements because they did not tremble, did not grieve, and did not ask to be believed. At 1:17 in the morning, she stood inside the hospital security office with Grant Ashford beside her, 2 guards behind her, and the blue glow of 6 monitors cutting shadows across her face. On the center screen, Caleb Brooks sat in the plastic chair by the vending machine with his toolbox at his feet and Isaiah's lunchbox on his knees. He did not look like a threat. That irritated Grant. It confused Madeline. The camera showed him tearing the sandwich into 3 pieces, then waiting. Not offering it into the children's hands. Not coaxing them with smiles. Not performing kindness for the nurses watching nearby. Just waiting. Noah took the first piece after almost a full minute. Lily took hers only after Caleb placed his own piece in his mouth, as if she needed proof that eating was safe. Madeline folded her arms over her cream coat. She had handled inheritance wars, emergency custody motions, hostile boardroom transfers, and families that smiled in public while sharpening knives under the table. She knew the posture of manipulation. She knew the rhythm of people trying to look innocent. Caleb did not fit the pattern. That made him harder to trust, not easier. "He is good," Grant said softly. Madeline glanced at him. "Good at what?" "At appearing harmless." The words should have sounded reasonable. Instead, they sounded rehearsed. On the screen, Lily leaned against Noah, eyes half closed, still holding the torn cashmere. Caleb picked up the napkin with Isaiah's rocket ship and folded it carefully so the crayon drawing would not smear. Then, when a nurse approached with a blanket, Caleb nodded once toward the floor beside Lily, silently suggesting she place it there rather than drape it over the girl. The nurse followed his cue. Lily did not pull away. Madeline noticed that too. She noticed too much now, and every detail made the room less comfortable. "Run it back to when he first entered the corridor," she said. The guard clicked the mouse. The footage rewound in gray silence. Caleb appeared at the edge of the frame, walking toward the service exit, tired shoulders, toolbox in one hand, lunchbox in the other. He heard something. He stopped. That was the first detail that struck her. He had been leaving. Whatever happened next had not been planned by a man trying to get close to the Ashford heirs. He set down the toolbox before he approached, as if making himself smaller. He lowered himself to the floor slowly. He put the lunchbox in the open space. He spoke, but the camera had no sound. Madeline found herself reading the shape of his posture instead. Careful. Patient. Familiar with fear. "He should have called staff," Grant said. "He is staff," Madeline replied before she could stop herself. Grant turned his head. She felt his stare, but kept her eyes on the screen. Caleb had not crossed the last few feet between himself and the children. Lily crossed them. The child reached first. That fact sat in Madeline's mind like a stone dropped into still water. "What do you know about him?" she asked. Grant exhaled through his nose. "He fixes pipes. He changes light bulbs. He is not relevant. Children usually do not cling to irrelevant people." Grant's jaw tightened. Madeline heard it in the silence more than she saw it. On the monitor, Noah stepped in front of the toolbox again. Protective. Intentional. Not of Caleb exactly, but of something connected to him. Madeline leaned closer. There was the badge. There was the drawing. There was Caleb closing the lid not to conceal it from the adults, but to stop the adults from frightening the boy. It was a tiny distinction. It was everything. Down the hall, beyond the security office, Noah and Lily were resting in a private observation room. Not sleeping, not fully. But quiet. Nurses had dimmed the fluorescent lights. A blanket lay across Lily's knees. Caleb sat outside the room now, not inside, because he had asked permission to remain where the children could see him through the glass. He had also asked to use the phone to call his son. That request had embarrassed Madeline in a way she did not understand. She had been so focused on protecting billionaire orphans that she had forgotten the maintenance worker might have a child waiting for him too. Through the glass wall of the security office, she could see him in the corridor, phone pressed to his ear, voice low, one hand rubbing his tired forehead. He was not asking anyone for overtime. He was not calling reporters. He was telling Isaiah to brush his teeth and listen to Mrs. Turner. Madeline looked back at the monitor, then at Caleb in real life, and the distance between what she had assumed and what she was seeing became impossible to ignore. Then a nurse entered the security office holding a small clear evidence bag. "Miss Pierce," she said carefully, "this was found in Miss Ashford's coat pocket when trauma staff logged her belongings." Inside was a folded note, damp at the edges, with 3 words written across the front in Evelyn Ashford's handwriting. "For Madeline only." Madeline did not open the note in front of Grant. That was the first decision she made that night which did not belong to the Ashford family. She looked at the evidence bag, then at the nurse, and something in her expression made the woman understand without another word. "Log it under personal effects," Madeline said. "Chain of custody. No copies." Grant stepped closer. "If it concerns Evelyn, it concerns the estate." Madeline held the bag against her coat, her polished fingers steady around the plastic. "And if it concerns the estate, it will be handled properly." Her tone left no open door. Grant stared at her for a long second, then smiled in a thin way powerful men smile when they decide anger can wait. "Do not let sentiment cloud procedure." Madeline almost laughed. There was nothing sentimental about the cold weight sitting in her palm. Procedure was the only thing keeping the room from cracking open. Outside the security office, Caleb ended his phone call with Isaiah and stood in the corridor beneath a flickering fluorescent light. He looked older in that light, not weak, just worn down by a life that had required him to be dependable before it ever allowed him to be tired. He slipped the phone into his pocket and checked the observation room through the glass. Noah was sitting upright now, not fully calm, but watching. Lily had curled sideways with the blanket around her, the torn cashmere still tucked under her chin. When Caleb looked at them, his face changed in a way Madeline had no legal language for. Softer. Guarded. Fatherly without claiming the right. "Mr. Brooks," she said, stepping into the hallway. He turned at once. "Yes, ma'am. The children are asking if you can stay until morning." Caleb looked toward the room, then down at his boots. Water had dried in pale marks across the leather. "I have a son at home. I heard." Her voice was quieter than before. "Is he safe?" "With our neighbor. But he has school. We can arrange transportation." Caleb shook his head gently. "He does not need arrangements. He needs his father to keep his word." Madeline felt that sentence more than she wanted to. In her world, people solved absence with drivers, assistants, wire transfers, overnight staff. Caleb spoke as if presence was not a service but a duty. She looked through the glass at Noah, whose eyes had not left Caleb. They may not make it through the night without another panic episode. Caleb absorbed that without flinching. He did not ask what it paid. He did not ask what it might mean. He thought of Isaiah's lunchbox, now empty except for the folded rocket napkin. He thought of his boy waking up to Mrs. Turner's cinnamon oatmeal instead of his father's burned toast. Then he took a slow breath. "Let me call him again," he said. "And let me speak to Mrs. Turner myself. I will not have my child finding out from strangers that I stayed." Madeline nodded. It was such a simple request, and yet it corrected everyone in the hallway. Caleb did not abandon one child to comfort another. He made room for both. 10 minutes later, he sat in the chair outside the observation room with a hospital blanket over his shoulders that he had not asked for. Lily had fallen asleep only after Madeline allowed the door to stay open 3 inches. Noah sat on the edge of his bed, knees pulled to his chest, watching Caleb through the gap. "He can see you," Madeline said. Caleb nodded. "That is why I am still." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time her beauty seemed less like armor and more like something carefully maintained because the world punished visible cracks. "What did you say to him in the chapel?" she asked. "Noah." Caleb rubbed one thumb over the seam of his work pants. "Nothing important. Children do not remember nothing." He considered that. "I told him sometimes being lost is not the same as being left." Madeline went quiet. Behind her, the city rain softened against the windows. Inside her coat pocket, Evelyn's unopened note seemed to grow heavier with every second. Caleb looked at the observation room, not at her. "His mother came that day," he said. "Blonde woman. Elegant. Looked like she had run through half the hospital in expensive shoes. She thanked me like she meant it." Madeline's throat tightened. "Evelyn." Caleb nodded. "I did not know who she was." "She knew who you were," Madeline said before she could stop herself. Caleb turned to her slowly. The hallway seemed to narrow around them. "What does that mean?" Madeline reached into her coat pocket, her fingers touching the sealed evidence bag. She should have waited for daylight. She should have waited for witnesses, forms, a clean conference table, the safe language of law. Instead, Lily stirred in the room and whispered one word in her sleep. "Chapel." Madeline looked at Caleb, then at the note, and for the first time that night, the attorney who trusted paper more than people was afraid of what the paper might say. Madeline waited until the hallway emptied before she opened Evelyn Ashford's note. Dawn had not arrived yet, but the hospital had entered that strange hour when night feels too tired to continue and morning has not earned the right to begin. Grant had disappeared into a private consultation room with two family advisors, speaking in low tones through a closed door. The nurses moved softly around Noah and Lily. Caleb remained in a chair outside the observation room, awake, still, his hands folded over Isaiah's empty lunchbox like he was guarding something more valuable than food. Madeline stood a few feet away near the window, the evidence bag trembling only slightly between her fingers. She hated the tremble. She broke the seal with care, unfolded the damp paper, and saw Evelyn's handwriting, elegant but rushed, slanting hard across the page. Madeline read once. Then again. The words did not explain everything. They made everything worse. If anything happens to me, do not leave Noah and Lily with Grant. Find Caleb Brooks. The man from the chapel. He saw my son when everyone else saw a schedule. Madeline closed her eyes for 1 second. It was not a legal document. Not enough by itself. Not witnessed. Not notarized. Not the kind of clean instrument a court would accept without a fight. But it was Evelyn. It was intent. It was fear written in expensive ink on a folded piece of paper hidden in the pocket of a coat she had died wearing. When Madeline opened her eyes, Caleb was watching her. Not with suspicion. With concern. That made it harder. Is it bad? He asked. Most people in his position would have asked if it involved them. Caleb asked as if he were worried about the children first. Madeline folded the note slowly. It is complicated. That usually means bad. It means your name is in it. Caleb's face did not change much, but she saw the weight enter his shoulders. The smallest drop. The kind a tired man allows before remembering he is being watched. My name. Evelyn wrote it. He looked through the glass at Noah, then Lily. Why would she do that? Madeline did not answer right away. She did not know how to explain that powerful families often kept beautiful rooms and ugly secrets. She did not know how to say that Evelyn, who had smiled at charity galas and signed hospital donations with a diamond pen, had apparently been frightened enough to leave instructions in a coat pocket. She trusted what happened in the chapel, Madeline said at last. Caleb looked down at his hands. The hospital lights caught the grease still trapped near his knuckles. I only waited with him. Maybe that was the point. Before he could respond, Grant's voice cut across the corridor. What was the point? Madeline turned. Grant stood outside the consultation room, his overcoat gone now, sleeves buttoned, expression composed. Too composed. His eyes moved from Madeline's face to the folded note in her hand. What is that? Personal correspondence from Evelyn. Then it belongs to the estate. Not until I determine relevance. Grant stepped closer. You work for this family. Madeline held his gaze. I work for the law governing this family. The difference was small. In that hallway, it sounded enormous. Caleb stood, not to interfere, but because Grant's tone had made Noah sit up behind the glass. Sir, Caleb said quietly, the children can hear you. Grant looked at him as if a chair had spoken. You are still here because Miss Pierce allowed an emotional mistake. Do not mistake that for importance. Caleb absorbed the insult without a visible wound. He had a lifetime of practice placing dignity between himself and other people's contempt. No, sir, he said. I am here because they asked me to stay. Noah appeared in the doorway then, barefoot, blanket around his shoulders. Lily stood behind him, holding his shirt. Madeline moved toward them, but stopped when Noah raised one hand. His eyes were on Grant. Mom said Uncle Grant gets loud when people know things. The corridor went silent again. Grant's face did not collapse. It tightened by degrees. Madeline felt the note in her hand become heavier than paper. Caleb did not look at Grant. He looked at Noah. Come on, "Buddy," he said softly. "You do not have to carry grown folks' words tonight." Noah hesitated. Then he walked past Madeline and stood beside Caleb's chair, close enough for safety, not close enough to be touched. Lily followed. Madeline watched them choose him in real time, not because he had money, status, or permission, but because he knew when to make the room quieter. Grant saw it too, and for the first time, his polished control showed a hairline crack. Madeline slipped Evelyn's note back into the evidence bag and made a decision she could not yet defend in court. She would not hand it to Grant. Not that night. Not with the children watching. Not while Caleb Brooks, a maintenance worker with an empty lunchbox and tired eyes, was the only adult in the corridor who seemed to understand that love was not ownership. By 6:12 in the morning, the rain had thinned to a silver mist over Atlanta, and the hospital windows began to catch the first weak color of day. Caleb had been awake for more than 24 hours. His eyes burned. His back ached from the plastic chair. His uniform smelled faintly of rain, metal, and cafeteria coffee gone cold. Still, when Lily stirred in the observation room, he sat a little straighter, not because anyone asked him to, but because children notice when the adults around them start fading. Noah had finally fallen asleep with one hand resting on the folded rocket napkin. Lily slept facing the open door. Every few minutes, her lashes fluttered, and her gaze searched until it found Caleb in the hallway. Only then did she settle again. Madeline watched this from the nurse's station with Evelyn's note locked inside her briefcase and a new kind of exhaustion behind her polished eyes. She had spent the last hour making calls that sounded procedural on the outside and dangerous underneath. Family court liaison. Hospital social worker. Emergency child advocate. Private estate counsel not connected to Grant. Every call made the same quiet truth harder to avoid. Noah and Lily could not be handed over to the Ashford mansion simply because the mansion had gates, staff, and a famous last name. Children were not heirlooms. They were not assets to be transferred before breakfast. Grant understood what she was doing before she said it out loud. He found her near the coffee machine, where the paper cups were stacked beside powdered creamer no one rich ever touched. "You are delaying their release," he said. Madeline added nothing to her coffee. Her hand was steady now. "The children require observation. The doctors cleared them. Their bodies, maybe." Grant leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Do not become sentimental because a maintenance man sat on the floor." Madeline looked at him, elegant and still, the soft hospital light catching the sharp line of her jaw. "I became concerned when two children recoiled from their uncle and reached for a stranger." The words were clean. Controlled. They cut anyway. Grant's eyes hardened, but Caleb appeared at the end of the hall before he could answer. He had washed his hands, though the work stains had not fully left. He carried 2 small cartons of milk from the cafeteria and a paper plate with toast cut into strips. Nothing about him looked impressive. That was the strange part. Nothing about him demanded attention, and yet the hallway kept rearranging itself around his quiet. Madeline stepped toward him. "Mr. Brooks, the social worker will be here in 20 minutes. Caleb nodded. "All right. She may ask whether you are willing to remain available as a temporary support contact for the children." He looked at her carefully. Temporary support contact sounds like words people use when they do not want to say what they mean. A tired breath almost became a smile on Madeline's face, but not quite. "They may ask you to help with transition until the court reviews Evelyn's instructions." Caleb glanced through the glass. Noah was awake now, watching him. Lily sat beside him, hair tangled, coat piece still in her lap. Caleb thought of the apartment above the laundromat. The leaky sink. Isaiah's school papers taped to the refrigerator. One bedroom barely big enough for one boy, let alone 3 children carrying grief that money could not fold away. "Miss Pierce," he said, "I am not equipped for billionaire children. No one is asking you to be. That family will." Madeline did not deny it. He looked down at the milk cartons in his hands. I am equipped for breakfast. Homework. Bad dreams. Telling the truth when it costs something. That is about it. Madeline's eyes changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for Caleb to see the woman beneath the attorney. That may be more than they have had, she said. Behind the glass, Lily slid off the bed and walked to the door. The nurse started to stop her, then looked at Madeline. Madeline gave one small nod. Lily stepped into the corridor, bare feet silent on the tile, and looked up at Caleb. Are you leaving? Caleb crouched, keeping the milk between them like a small peace offering. I have to check on my son. Lily's face tightened. Noah appeared behind her, trying to be brave again. Caleb saw it and made his voice gentle but firm. And then I will come back if the grown-ups say it is all right. Grant laughed once from near the coffee machine, quiet and cold. This is absurd. Caleb did not look at him. Lily did. Then she turned back to Caleb and held out the torn piece of cashmere. Mommy said not to go to the house. The hallway went still. Madeline's fingers closed around her coffee cup. Caleb felt the weight of every adult waiting for him to react. He did not ask Lily to explain. He did not look triumphant. He simply reached for the hospital blanket on the chair and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then we will make sure somebody listens, he said. Madeline looked from the child to Caleb, and for the first time since midnight, she stopped wondering whether he belonged in this story. The harder question was why Evelyn Ashford had known he would. The social worker arrived at 6:34, carrying a leather folder and the careful expression of someone who had walked into too many family emergencies before breakfast. Her name was Denise Carter, and unlike the Ashford advisors waiting near the elevators, she did not look first at Grant, or Madeline, or the expensive coats folded over visitor chairs. She looked at Noah and Lily. Then she looked at Caleb. That order mattered. Caleb noticed it, and so did Madeline. Denise asked simple questions in a small consultation room with beige walls and a watercolor painting of a lake. Did the children know where they were? Did they know who had been with them? Did they feel safe leaving the hospital? Noah answered almost nothing. Lily answered even less. But when Denise asked who they wanted nearby, both children turned their heads toward the glass panel in the door where Caleb stood outside with his toolbox by his feet. He had refused to sit in the room unless invited. He said children deserved one conversation that did not feel surrounded. Madeline wrote that sentence down without meaning to. Grant paced behind her, his patience thinning by the minute. This is unnecessary, he said. Their home is prepared. Their rooms are prepared. Their staff is prepared. Denise looked up from her notes. Prepared is not the same as safe. The air changed. Grant's face remained composed, but his hands stopped moving. Madeline felt the shift and kept her eyes on the file. There were times when silence was not weakness. Caleb had taught the room that without ever trying. By mid-morning, the hospital released Noah and Lily into temporary protective supervision pending an emergency review. The phrase sounded cold enough to hide the mercy inside it. Caleb was listed not as guardian, not as family, but as approved support contact. It was the smallest legal doorway Madeline could open without breaking the wall. Grant signed the acknowledgement with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Caleb signed nothing. He only asked whether the children had shoes dry enough for the ride. Madeline looked down and saw Lily's bare toes curled against the tile. For all the money surrounding them, no one had thought of socks. Caleb did. That embarrassed her more than she wanted to admit. The first stop was not the Ashford mansion. It was Caleb's apartment, because he would not stay another hour without seeing Isaiah. Madeline drove behind the hospital transport in a black sedan, watching through the windshield as Caleb's old pickup turned into a narrow street above a laundromat, its paint dull, its tailgate dented, its rear window decorated with a faded school sticker. Grant would have called the building unacceptable. Madeline found herself wondering why Unacceptable looked warmer than every Ashford room she had ever entered. Isaiah came running down the stairs before Caleb reached the door. He was 9, thin, bright-eyed, wearing a school uniform shirt with one collar bent upward. He stopped when he saw Noah and Lily behind his father. He looked at their pale faces, their hospital wristbands, the blanket around Lily's shoulders. Then he looked at Caleb, asking the question without words. Caleb placed one hand gently on his son's shoulder. "They had a hard night," he said. "We are going to be kind." Isaiah nodded, solemn in the way children become solemn when trusted with tenderness. "Okay. No jealousy. No complaint about the missed breakfast. No demand for explanation." He simply opened the apartment door wider. Inside, the rooms were small but clean. A stack of library books leaned beside the couch. A chore chart hung on the refrigerator. The sink dripped once every few seconds. Isaiah took 2 cups from the cabinet, then hesitated and took 2 more. Lily watched him as if this ordinary generosity were a language she had almost forgotten. Noah stood near the doorway, still wearing the guarded look of a boy who did not believe rooms stayed peaceful. Caleb noticed, but did not rush him. He set his toolbox under the kitchen table, put water on the stove for oatmeal, and moved through the apartment with quiet certainty. Madeline stood near the entrance, too polished for the peeling paint, too expensive for the narrow hallway, and strangely unwilling to leave. Her phone buzzed again and again with Grant's messages, estate council updates, missed calls from people who believed money could organize grief by noon. She silenced it. Lily drifted toward the refrigerator. Among Isaiah's spelling tests and crayon rockets was a drawing of Caleb holding a toolbox, his son beside him under a crooked yellow sun. Lily reached up, touched the corner of the paper, and whispered, "He draws you big." Isaiah shrugged, suddenly shy. "That is because he is." Caleb heard it from the stove. He did not turn around, but his shoulders went still. Madeline saw that stillness. She saw a man trying not to let children see what love did to him. Then Noah, who had not stepped more than 2 feet into the apartment, looked at Isaiah and asked quietly, "Does he come back when he says he will?" Isaiah answered without hesitation. "Always." The word landed harder than any legal document Madeline had carried that morning. Noah looked at Caleb then, and something in his face loosened by the smallest degree. Not trust yet. Not peace. But the first crack in fear. And Madeline, standing in a poor man's kitchen with her silent phone in her hand, began to understand why Evelyn Ashford had chosen the one thing her family could not buy. For 3 days, Caleb's apartment became a place the Ashford family could not understand. It was too small, too plain, too close to the laundromat's warm rumble beneath the floorboards. The kitchen table had one uneven leg, the hallway light flickered when the microwave ran, and the couch had a faded blanket tucked over one arm to hide a tear in the fabric. Yet Noah slept there the first night without waking up screaming. Lily ate oatmeal with brown sugar from a chipped blue bowl. Isaiah gave up the bottom bunk without being asked, then told Noah the top bunk was better anyway because it was closer to the moon. Caleb watched all of it with the quiet worry of a man counting more needs than he had money to meet. He went to work during the day, came home smelling of metal dust and hospital soap, cooked whatever he could stretch, checked Isaiah's homework, washed Lily's borrowed socks in the sink, and sat outside the bedroom door until Noah's breathing evened out. He never called it sacrifice. He called it Tuesday. Madeline came every evening with papers, updates, and the kind of controlled elegance that made neighbors peek through curtains. Her black sedan looked out of place beside Caleb's old pickup. Her tailored coats looked out of place on the narrow stairs. But each time she entered the apartment, she stayed a little longer. At first, she stood near the door. Then near the counter. By the 3rd night, she sat at the kitchen table while Caleb packed 3 lunches for school, folding napkins around sandwiches with the seriousness of a man preparing evidence for court. "You know this cannot remain informal," she said. Caleb placed an apple into Isaiah's lunch bag. Nothing about two grieving children sleeping in my son's room feels informal, Miss Pierce. Grant is petitioning for immediate family placement. Caleb did not stop moving, but Madeline saw his hand slow over the second lunch bag. With him? With the estate. Caleb gave her a look. Not angry. Tired of polished words hiding plain things. Children do not live with an estate. Madeline looked down at the papers in front of her. Emergency review. Temporary placement. Guardian suitability. Words she understood. Words that suddenly felt too thin for the room around her. In the bedroom, Isaiah laughed softly at something Lily said. Noah did not laugh yet, but he stayed. Sometimes staying was the first language of healing. There is another issue, Madeline said. Caleb closed the lunch bag. There always is. Your record will be examined. Income. Housing. Work schedule. Prior debts. Medical history. References. Everything. He nodded. I figured. They will use all of it against you. Because I am poor. Madeline hesitated. Caleb did not. It is all right. You can say it. She met his eyes. Because you are poor. Because you are not family. Because you are a black man who somehow became the person two billionaire children trust most, and people like Grant will call that suspicious before they call it beautiful. The honesty sat between them, heavy and clean. Caleb looked toward the bedroom door. Beautiful does not keep the lights on. No, Madeline said. But truth matters. He almost smiled. Truth matters when someone can afford to prove it. That reached her. More than he meant it to. She had spent years proving truth for people who paid by the hour, people whose pain came wrapped in trusts, holdings, and private security. Caleb's truth lived in utility bills, school notices, second-hand shoes, and the steady discipline of coming home when he said he would. A knock came at the door before either of them could speak. Not a neighbor's knock. Firm. Official. Caleb opened it to find two men in suits standing beside Grant Ashford. Grant did not look inside the apartment. He looked over it, as if poverty were something that might stain his shoes. Mr. Brooks, he said, holding out a folder. This has gone far enough. Madeline stood quickly. Grant, this is inappropriate. What is inappropriate, Grant said, is allowing my sister's children to remain in this environment another night. Lily appeared behind Caleb, holding the sleeve of one of Isaiah's old sweatshirts. Noah stood beside her, silent, watching. Caleb shifted just enough to block the doorway without making it look like a challenge. Not in front of them, he said. Grant's eyes narrowed. You do not give instructions in this matter. Caleb's voice stayed low. I do when children are listening. One of the suited men opened the folder. Madeline saw the top page and went still. It was not just a custody petition. It was a complaint against Caleb, alleging improper influence over the Ashford children and unauthorized possession of personal family materials. The badge. The drawing. The note would be next if Grant found it. Madeline felt the room tilt. Caleb looked at the papers, then at Noah and Lily, and something quiet hardened behind his eyes. Not rage. Resolve. He handed the folder back without taking it. You can say what you need to say in court, he said. Grant smiled faintly. We will. Then Noah stepped forward, his small hand wrapped around Isaiah's rocket napkin, and said the words that made every adult in the doorway fall silent. If he goes, I go too. Noah's words did not sound like a child making a threat. They sounded like a child telling the only truth he had left. If he goes, I go too. Caleb felt the sentence strike the room and immediately wished the boy had not needed to say it. Children should not have to turn loyalty into a shield. He lowered himself to one knee, not caring that Grant and the suited men were watching from the doorway. "Noah," he said gently, "you do not have to fight grown-up battles." Noah's fingers tightened around Isaiah's rocket napkin. "You came back." Caleb held his gaze. There it was again. The thing Noah could not explain but kept reaching for. Not money. Not rescue. Return. Caleb swallowed the ache in his throat and kept his voice even. "I did. Then I am staying where people come back." Lily stepped closer, pressing her shoulder against Noah's arm. Isaiah stood behind them in the hallway, quiet and pale, old enough to understand that something important was happening, too young to know what it might cost. Madeline moved between Grant and the children, her body language clean and legal, but her eyes carrying something less polished now. "This visit is over," she said. Grant's smile thinned. "You do not have the authority to dismiss family. I have the authority to report intimidation of children under temporary protective supervision." One of the suited men shifted. The other looked down at his folder. Grant noticed. His face did not change, but the room felt it when his control tightened. "Careful, Madeline. I am being careful. That is why you are leaving." Caleb rose slowly. He did not speak. He did not add to her words. He simply stood near the children with his hands visible, his shoulders squared, his presence steady enough to make the small apartment feel less breakable. Grant looked at him for a long moment. "You think this makes you noble?" Caleb shook his head once. "No, sir. I think it makes me tired." The honesty caught everyone off guard. Even Grant. Caleb continued, voice low, almost weary. "I am tired of children being talked around like furniture. I am tired of men in expensive coats deciding fear looks better when it is quiet. And I am tired enough to say this plainly. Not in front of them." Madeline turned her head slightly. She had heard anger from powerful men all her career. Caleb's restraint was different. It did not try to dominate the room. It protected the room from becoming uglier. Grant's eyes flicked toward Noah and Lily, then back to Caleb. "Court, then." Caleb nodded. "Court, then." The words should have sounded like defeat. They did not. After Grant and the men left, the apartment did not relax right away. The hallway held the echo of polished shoes on old stairs. Lily climbed onto the couch and pulled her knees beneath Isaiah's sweatshirt. Noah stood by the window, watching the black car below until it pulled away from the curb. Isaiah picked up the lunch bags Caleb had forgotten on the table and lined them up neatly, as if order could be rebuilt one small thing at a time. Madeline stayed by the door, her phone in one hand, Evelyn's note hidden in her briefcase, and the decision growing heavier by the minute. Caleb went to the stove and turned off the burner under water that had nearly boiled away. Such an ordinary motion. Such a fatherly one. The day was falling apart, and he was still preventing something from burning. "Mr. Brooks," Madeline said quietly, "the emergency hearing will likely be tomorrow morning." Caleb did not look surprised. "All right. You need counsel." He gave a dry, tired breath. "I have $37 in checking until Friday. I did not ask how much money you had." That made him turn. Madeline stood straighter, elegant in his narrow kitchen, but no longer distant. "I am going to file a motion to preserve Evelyn's expressed wishes and request a child advocate separate from the estate." Caleb studied her. "Why?" She could have said procedure. She could have said risk management. She could have said a dozen careful things. Instead, she looked toward the living room, where Lily had fallen asleep against the arm of the couch while Noah stood guard beside her like a tiny old man. "Because they are afraid of the house," she said. "And because you are the only adult no one can buy." Caleb looked away first. Not because he was ashamed, but because words like that were dangerous when a man had spent his life surviving on smaller praise. In the quiet that followed, Isaiah walked to the refrigerator and took down his drawing of Caleb with the toolbox. He handed it to Noah. "You can keep this one," he said. Noah looked at the crooked yellow sun, then at Caleb drawn impossibly tall. His lips moved before sound came out. "Does he get scared?" Isaiah glanced at his father. Caleb did not answer for him. He let his son tell the truth. "Yes," Isaiah said. "But he still does stuff." Madeline felt the sentence settle over the room with more force than any affidavit. Then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen, short and unsigned. "Ask Caleb what Evelyn gave him in the chapel." Madeline's hand went cold around the phone. Across the room, Caleb was folding Lily's blanket, unaware that another door from the past had just opened. Madeline did not ask the question right away. She let the apartment breathe first. She let Isaiah finish putting the lunch bags back on the counter. She let Noah sit on the floor beside the couch where Lily slept, his hand still wrapped around the drawing of Caleb under the crooked sun. She let Caleb rinse 3 bowls in the sink, stack them carefully, and wipe the counter with the corner of a dish towel already worn thin from years of use. Only then did she step closer, her phone still cold in her palm. "Mr. Brooks," she said, softer than before, "when you waited with Noah in the chapel months ago, did Evelyn give you anything?" Caleb turned off the faucet. The sound of dripping water continued for 2 seconds, then stopped. His face did not show fear, but something inside him shifted. A memory passing behind his eyes. "She gave me a thank you," he said. Madeline watched him carefully. "Nothing else?" He looked toward Noah, then toward Isaiah, measuring how much of the past could enter the room without hurting the children. "She gave me an envelope." Madeline's breath tightened. "Where is it?" Caleb dried his hands slowly. "In my toolbox." The apartment seemed to still around that word. Toolbox. The same old dented box Grant had tried to turn into evidence. The same box Noah had guarded in the hospital corridor. Caleb walked to the kitchen table and pulled it out from underneath. The metal scraped softly against the floor. He set it on the table like something ordinary, but Madeline could see the care in his hands. This was not just where he kept tools. It was where he kept small things people forgot mattered. He opened the latch. Inside lay electrical tape, a voltage tester, a flashlight, loose screws, Isaiah's old pencil, the folded badge, the child's drawing, and tucked beneath a cardboard divider, a cream envelope sealed with clear tape. Caleb held it for a moment before giving it to her. "I never opened it." Madeline looked up. "Why not?" "Because it was not mine." "Evelyn gave it to you." "She asked me to keep it safe." "That is different." There was no performance in his answer. No attempt to sound noble. Just a rule he lived by when no one was watching. Madeline felt the force of that more deeply than any dramatic speech could have reached her. Men like Grant owned things because they could. Caleb protected things because someone had trusted him. She examined the envelope. Evelyn's handwriting crossed the front in careful blue ink. "For the day someone tries to take them where they are afraid to go." Madeline sat down at the kitchen table because her knees suddenly needed the chair. Caleb remained standing, one hand resting near the toolbox, as if it connected him to a version of himself that had made a promise without knowing its cost. "May I open it?" she asked. He nodded. "You are the lawyer." "That is not why I am asking." He understood then. She was asking because he had guarded it. Because the envelope had passed through his poor apartment, his hospital shifts, his son's lunch money problems, his long nights and tired mornings, and he had still not treated it like opportunity. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Madeline opened it carefully. Inside was a signed letter, not notarized, but dated. Beneath it was a small storage key taped to a business card for an Atlanta law office that had closed 2 years earlier. The letter was short. It did not explain Grant. It did not accuse him fully. Not yet. It said that if Madeline was reading it, Evelyn was no longer able to protect her children by herself. It said Noah remembered the chapel because Caleb had shown him safety without asking who he belonged to. It said Lily listened to Noah more than anyone, and if Noah trusted Caleb, Lily might survive the first days after losing her mother. It said one more thing that made Madeline stop breathing for a moment. Grant must never control their trust before the blue file is found. Caleb saw her face change. What blue file? Madeline did not answer immediately. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street below. Inside, Lily turned in her sleep and whispered for her mother. Noah reached up and touched the edge of the couch, grounding her without waking her. Isaiah stood beside the refrigerator, old enough now to feel that his kitchen had become the center of something far bigger than any of them. Madeline folded the letter back with hands that were steady only because she forced them to be. There is a storage key, she said. And a law office. Caleb looked at the key, then at the children. Then you should take it to the court. I will, she said. But not alone. He gave a tired frown. Miss Pierce, I fix hospital lights. I do not belong in whatever this is. Madeline looked at the toolbox, the lunch bags, the drawing, the children who had chosen his doorway over a mansion. I think Evelyn believed you did. Before Caleb could answer, Noah stood. His eyes were fixed on the key in Madeline's hand. Mom had a blue folder, he whispered. She hid it in the place with no windows. Madeline went completely still. Caleb turned toward the boy. Noah, buddy, you do not have to remember right now. But Noah was already looking at the old toolbox, then at Grant's folder still lying by the door where nobody wanted to touch it. Uncle Grant was looking for it, he said. And in that small apartment above the laundromat, with oatmeal bowls still drying by the sink, Madeline finally understood that the fight for Noah and Lily had never been only about custody. The emergency hearing began the next morning in a small family courtroom on the 4th floor of the Fulton County Courthouse, not in the grand chamber Grant Ashford would have preferred. There were no chandeliers, no marble staircase, no reporters waiting behind velvet ropes. Just fluorescent lights, wooden benches, a seal on the wall, and 3 children sitting too close together on the second row while adults decided what safety was supposed to mean. Caleb wore his only dark jacket over a clean white shirt. The cuffs were a little frayed. His shoes had been polished until the cracks showed. Isaiah sat beside Noah and Lily, holding a paper bag with crackers and juice boxes because Caleb had taught him that nervous children forget to eat. Madeline noticed that before the hearing even began. She noticed everything now. The way Caleb stood when the judge entered, straight but not proud. The way he kept his hands folded in front of him so no one could mistake his stillness for defiance. The way Noah watched him instead of Grant. The way Lily leaned toward Isaiah when the Ashford attorneys spoke in words too large for children and too cold for grief. Grant sat at the opposite table in a charcoal suit, calm, polished, surrounded by counsel. He looked like the natural answer to every question money could ask. Caleb looked like a man who had come from work and had nowhere to hide. Yet when the judge asked why a maintenance worker had become central to an emergency custody matter involving one of Georgia's wealthiest families, the room did not turn toward Grant. It turned toward Caleb. He did not speak first. Madeline did. She presented the hospital observation notes, the social worker's emergency report, the security footage, and Evelyn's handwritten note. She did not mention the blue file yet. Not because it did not matter, but because she could feel Grant waiting for it like a man listening for a floorboard to creak. Some truths had to be protected until they could stand on their own. Grant's attorney argued family continuity, estate resources, private tutors, grief counselors, controlled access, familiar staff, a secure residence. The words sounded reasonable. Almost kind. Then Denise Carter stood and read from her report. Noah and Lily displayed visible distress when approached by Grant Ashford. Both children independently identified Caleb Brooks as a safe support person. Both children demonstrated improved eating, sleep, and verbal response in his presence. The judge looked over her glasses. "Mr. Brooks, are you seeking custody of these children?" Caleb felt every eye land on him. He thought of the apartment. The leaking sink. Isaiah's shared room. The $37 before Friday. He thought of Evelyn's envelope sitting in Madeline's locked briefcase. He thought of Lily asking if he was leaving and Noah asking if he always came back. "No, Your Honor," he said quietly. Grant's table relaxed by half an inch. Madeline did not. Caleb continued. "I am seeking for them not to be sent somewhere they are afraid to sleep." The courtroom changed. Not loudly. Just enough. The judge leaned back. "And what are you offering them, Mr. Brooks?" Caleb glanced once at Isaiah, then at Noah and Lily. "Breakfast. School. A door that opens when I say I am coming back. A place to be scared without being punished for it." He swallowed, but his voice stayed steady. "I cannot offer what that family can offer. I know that. But I can offer what my son has had from me every day of his life. I can stay." Lily began crying silently. Isaiah handed her a napkin without looking away from the judge. Noah stood before anyone could stop him. "He does not yell when I remember things," he said. The judge softened her voice. "What things, Noah?" Madeline's hand tightened around her pen. Caleb turned slightly, warning the boy with nothing but tenderness not to hurt himself for adults. Noah looked at Grant, then at the floor. "The place with no windows," he whispered. Grant's expression barely moved, but Madeline saw his left hand close into a fist beneath the table. The judge looked to Denise, then to Madeline. "Counsel, is there more the court should be aware of?" Madeline rose slowly. The blue file was not in her hands yet. The storage key had not been traced. The law office had not been found. But the child had opened a door no one could now close. "Your Honor," she said, "I believe there may be additional evidence relating to Mrs. Ashford's concerns before her death. I am requesting 48 hours to secure it, and in the meantime, temporary placement away from the Ashford residence, with supervised support from Mr. Brooks." Grant turned his head toward her with a look so cold it made the room feel smaller. Caleb saw it, but did not react. He simply reached back and rested one hand on the bench near the children, not touching them, just close enough for them to know he was still there. The judge looked at Noah. Then Lily. Then Isaiah, who sat between two orphans as if sharing a father had already become a duty he understood. The gavel came down softly, but in Caleb's chest it sounded like thunder. Temporary protective placement is granted pending further review. Grant's face went still. Madeline exhaled once. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second, not in victory, but in responsibility. Then Noah slipped the rocket napkin into Caleb's hand and whispered, "Now we find the blue folder." Caleb looked down at the crayon rocket, then at Madeline. Outside the courtroom windows, Atlanta moved on like nothing had changed.